Okay. Afternoon, everybody.
Woo!
I'm going to be reading a selection from a new anthology by myself and Stephen Van Patten called Hell at the Way Station. One of the stories in here, this is The Secret of Hanlon. Basil Carter had once read that it took an hour for alcohol to pass through the body. So having waited 2 hours after consuming his fourth beer, he convinced himself he could drive. He said goodnight to his friends, staggered behind his car to urinate, then got behind the wheel, mapping out his route home in his head. A 25-mile drive from the bowling alley in Richmond to Caroline County in Dawn, Virginia. He would do that in 30 to 45 minutes easily. To avoid the traffic on I-95, he took Route 301, an old two-lane highway that cut through the rural part of the country. Basil knew that this highway like the back of his hand and wasn't worried about cruising it. The road was unlit, darkness soon engulfed him. While driving straight, the headlights provided ample vision. But on the turns, he put on the high beams. Hitting a deer could destroy his car. The effects of the alcohol started creeping up on him. He lowered the window for fresh air and inserted one of his Metallica CDs in the dashboard player. Cool night air brushed his face, reviving him, and he mashed his foot down on the gas pedal, raising his speed to 65, hoping to reach the straight blacktop faster so that he could speed home. As the road straightened, Basil heard two loud popping sounds. The car jerked, started skidding. Basil panicked. He slammed on the brakes. Turn into the skid, turn into the skid, he told himself. The back end of the car started to swerve, and he turned the wheel. The car came to a complete stop on the shoulder of the road, kicking up dirt and gravel. Basil let the cloud dissipate before turning the engine off. Great, he muttered. He took a flashlight from the glove compartment, then climbed out and walked to the front of the car. He passed the beam across the front tires. They were intact. Basil moved to the back of the car, shined the light on those tires. Those were flat. Ah! I don't believe this, Basil screamed into the night. What the hell did I run over? Basil shone the light behind him. A wet trail along the blacktop led under his car. He knelt by the bumper, dipped 2 fingers in the wet trail, raised his fingers to his nose and sniffed. The liquid had a coppery smell. Basil rubbed his fingers together and sniffed again. It smelled like dirt and old pennies. What the hell is this? Basil peeked under the car, extended his arm with the flashlight, and saw a thick root with tiny thorns wrapped around the axle. A second, longer root had pierced the tire. The thorns were embedded in the rubber, were much larger. The root dripped red. Basil started to reach for it when he heard the cooing from the side of the road. He turned the light toward a bushel of grass at the base of a fence. The grass rustled. Then the cooing stopped. Okay, need to hurry this up. He turned his attention back to the root. He took hold of one and carefully unraveled it. As he did, the cooing started again. Basil ignored it. The other root, stuck in the rubber of the tire, refused to come loose. Basil pulled harder. More cooing this time from under the car. He stopped pulling and forced the light on the middle of the undercarriage. The cooing from the grass grew louder. Basil's hands began shaking. He put the flashlight down and grasped the root with both hands and pulled hard. The cooing under the car became shriller. The root began to snap. The cooing from the grass resounded again. Basil strained. The root snapped loose. The cooing under the car died out, as did the cooing from the grass shortly after. He crawled out from under the car with the root in his hand and shone the light on it. It wasn't just a root. It was the largest yam he had ever seen, much longer and wider than the ones in the supermarket, covered with eyes and small spuds like some mutation. Basil thought it brought it to his nose and sniffed. Odors of copper and dirt filled his nostrils. Oh! Basil jerked his head back. My God, you smell. He prepared to throw it over the fence when one of the attached thorns caught his arm. Wincing, he dropped the yam and grabbed his arm. He felt his blood run down his elbow. Damn, that was sharp. Basil carefully carried the yam back to the car and set it on the passenger seat. The small thorns had grown. He gingerly inspected it. Slowly, the thorns shrank back. Basil felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He was both frightened and fascinated. You're coming with me. I have to show you to my dad. Basil retrieved the piece of vine stuck in the tire, then perched on the car trunk to think. Focused on the yam, he had forgotten that he had 2 flat tires, no spare, and was stranded in the middle of the country in the dead of night. Off in the grass, the cooing restarted. Something rustled, then quickly took off into the field beyond. It stopped some distance away and started to coo again, fainter. Basil stood reluctantly and began walking along the shoulder of the road. He had taken only a few steps when his foot struck something hard protruding from the grass. He bent to pick it up. A road sign attached to a broken wooden post shone in the moonlight. Scratched letters, it revealed, Town of Hanlon, 1 mile. Hanlon? His family's roots in this part of Virginia went back to post-Civil War, but no one had ever mentioned a town called Hanlon. Could it be a long defunct? That would explain why the sign was down. If the town still existed, however, he might be able to reach it on its flats. He hoped they had a gas station. Basil got back in his car, started the engine, and slowly pulled it off the side of the road. The car limped badly. He gently accelerated, and the car bounced and thumped against the asphalt, but moved forward. Come on, baby. 1 mile is all I need, Basil urged. Something slammed the back bumper, forcing the car to lurch forward. Basil glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. He slowed, fearing a tire would fall off. The bumper was struck again with greater force. Damn it! The tires sputtered against the blacktop. He struggled to keep the car steady and straight, but the back end jerked and jumped. Tires started coming off their rims. Basil fought the steering wheel, and he kept his eye peeled for another sign for Hanlon, without success. It was faint hope. Then he saw a small sign that read, Gas, with an arrow pointing to the right. He leaned to one side of the road and spotted a side road ahead. Throwing caution to the wind, Basil jerked the wheel, turned onto the side road, and sped up. The road inclined upward until he could make out the glowing lights on the horizon. At the top of the incline, he spotted the gas station to his right. Basil sighed with relief. He blew his horn as he drove in. Like most rural gas stations, this one had 5 pumps, a large steel canopy to protect them from the weather, and a brick building off to the side housing a 2-door garage and an office. Bright lights above the canopy illuminated the pumping area. Stacked motor oil cans formed a makeshift pyramid. Basil stopped in front of them and rolled the window down. The attendant inside sat low behind the counter watching television, his head moving back and forth. Basil couldn't make out the show, but he walked up to the door and knocked. The attendant ignored him. Hey, can I get some service out here? The attendant still didn't get up. Basil turned to walk away when something moved out the corner of his eye. He glanced across on the station. A wooden fruit stand sat partly in shadow, but he could make out the produce in the bins. Behind them, a glassy-eyed man stared back at him. Who's out there? A voice called from the office. Basil turned. The attendant stood in the doorway. He was a middle-aged man in dirty coveralls with the name Carl printed on the right breast. I was calling you, Basil said peevishly. I heard you. I don't move till my show is over. What can I do for you? I had an accident down on the road. Something flattened 2 of my tires. I need new ones. Carl approached the car to inspect the damage. Basil followed. Ooh-wee! What the hell did you run over? All I found was this big-ass yam with a thorny root or roots wrapped around my axle. Carl eyeballed him. You're saying a yam did this? Basil reached into the car and retrieved the yam. Carl immediately took several steps back. Whoa, I know. You ever seen anything like it? Carl didn't answer. He stared at the yam, then his eyes slowly shifted toward the man at the fruit stand. The latter moved slightly and kicked the stand, causing it to shift, catching Basil's attention. You ran over that thing? Carl asked. Yeah, Basil turned back to him. I didn't see it in the road. Maybe it fell off a truck. He offered it to the attendant. You want to hold it? The attendant shook his head. No, that's okay. Let me get you up and running, okay? 3 tires, right? I think we have what you need in the garage. Carl glared nervously at the fruit stand one last time before hurrying to the garage. Don't you need to know what size tire? I know what size you need. I know the make and model of the car. I'll be back in a minute. Wait there. Will do, Basil said. Carl returned, pulling a jack behind him. He looked Basil up and down. Can I get by? Basil put the yam back in the car and glared at the fruit stand. A portable generator near the stand suddenly roared to life. A string of white lights illuminated a small wooden shack that had with more rows of baskets on either side, filled with a variety of fruits and vegetables. The elderly man, whose glassy eyes faded as the light hit them, stared at Basil only a moment longer before turning to tend to the produce. Basil walked over. Not until Basil stood before him did the man lift his head and pass his hand over the baskets. Most of them held squash, corn, tomatoes, and peanuts. There were a couple of melons. Basil didn't see anything worth buying. He wandered to the end of the row and peered inside the last basket. It was filled with yams. Large, but nowhere near the size of the one he found on the highway. He picked one up to inspect it. You grow all these? Basil asked. You bet I do. This is pretty impressive. Good size. The best in all of Hanlon. You can't get them anywhere else. I take real good care of raising my yams, son. Trust me. You won't find anyone out there with such a fine product. Funny you should say that. I just happen to have one in my car. Well, impressive in its own way. Is that so? What exactly makes this yam so impressive? You ever see them grow roots with thorns? The man grew silent. He took the yam from Basil's hand and stroked it before returning it to the basket. Can't say as I have, he said. And just so you know, yams don't grow thorny roots. The elderly man began walking away. Basil followed. Well then, I found a rare vegetable, Basil continued. You sure it was a yam? Where have you laid your eyes on such a thing? Basil pointed toward the highway. I ran over one out there. Had roots like tentacles, he wiggled his fingers. And really sharp thorns on them. Rustling from the basket of yams caught Basil's attention. You say you have it in your car? The man said. Yes, I'm taking it home to show my family. My granddad used to grow potatoes, and I thought he could tell me what the deal is. The basket tipped over. The string of lights went out. The elderly man grabbed Basil's wrist, digging his fingertips deep into his flesh. He pulled Basil closer to the stand. The latter stumbled onto the baskets of fruits. Let me go, Basil tried to pull away. Does your family know you're here? The elderly man's voice turned raspy. What are you doing? Let me go. No. Something scurried from under the basket. Basil heard it move toward him. It brushed against his foot, heading toward his car. Basil turned, hoping for a glimpse. A root whipped out of the darkness to wrap around his throat. Its grip tightened. Basil struggled to pull it off. A razor-sharp thorn pressed against his jugular. Basil froze. The root started to tug. He cautiously turned toward the elderly man. The root came from behind the man's neck. It started to pull him to the right. That's when he saw the silhouette of the thing attached to the man's shoulder. What the? Stay still, a new voice whispered to Basil. We do not wish to harm you. We just want our brother back. Brother? The root pulled him closer. His eyes adjusted to the dark. Basil made out an oval-shaped creature with dozens of small glassy eyes. 6 of the eyes gazed past him, while the others kept close watch on his movements. We warned him not to leave the group, but the young are so curious. Basil felt more roots pass over his foot, scurrying from the fallen basket. He dared not move. His jugular was still in danger of being pierced. Don't kill me. Basil reached up to touch the root. Put your hand down. Basil complied. I said we don't want to harm you. Basil shifted his gaze to the elderly man's other shoulder. He could see roots moving up it. The yam he had run over came into view to lay on the man's shoulder. A large root with exposed thorns slapped down on the body of the yam, followed by a sickening sucking sound. The generator came back on, illuminating the string of lights, and the roots attached to the creature's body were transparent. Basil saw thick red fluid flowing through them. To the right, another larger yam, the one that had been talking to him, inserted a root into the elderly man's mouth like a fishhook. Thicker red fluid flowed through it as well. Basil felt sick. The elderly man shuddered, and the yam continued draining fluid. Finally, the smaller yam on the left made a cooing sound and its eyes opened. The fluid stopped, and the root slid out of the man's mouth. The root around Basil's throat also slipped away, along with the thorn. Basil rubbed his neck, bent over, and vomited. What the hell are you? He asked, wiping his mouth. The yam root pointed to the fallen basket. All of its yams watched Basil. They used their roots to stand on, so their bodies appeared suspended in midair, and one by one, they used their roots to form a circle around him. Basil screamed for Carl. He cannot help you, more than he has already, the creature said. And it is unfortunate you saw us like this. We had hoped to retrieve our brother unnoticed. Basil raised his hands. Your secret is safe with me. I won't tell anyone what I've seen. Of course you will tell people. It's in your nature to do so. People will come when you tell them. They will want to see us. It removed its roots from around the elderly man, who then shuffled away. A huge yam with roots the size of small tree trunks now stood before Basil. It stepped closer. We have lived here in this peace for longer than I care to remember. This country belongs to us, which means its inhabitants belong to us. What are you? Where did you come from? What purpose would it serve you to know what we are? Basil turned when he heard the pickup truck pull into the station. The yam made a rueful sound.